One of the many ways the U.S. has crippled Guatemala, for example, is through the adoption process. I won't cite the civil war they started because there are already enough books on the topic. This is something no one speaks about and has to be dragged into the light. Long ago, the church handled adoptions here and ran it well. Then the Clinton administration got involved and they privatized adoptions, making babies available to the highest bidder instead of vetted childless households. When parents found they could receive money for their unwanted children, a cottage industry was created almost overnight. The cost ranged from around $12,000 to $30,000. Of this, the adoption agency charged a fee of about $3,000. The Guatemalan lawyers between $10,000 and $15,000, and the mother received as little as $500 to $1,000. Fathers made their daughters get pregnant as early and as often as they could, devaluing their children for the sake of a small income. Those babies were being purchased not just by couples unable to have their own, but by slave traffickers who would then use them for all manner of evil. When the U.S. government realized that they had created a monster, they put a stop to it by disqualifying Guatemala from the process. Then, with no more money coming in and their daughters already devalued, the families put them out on the street or in whorehouses to earn that money. I just learned that girls have been escaping from one such bordello not far from my house, having been sold into slavery by their parents. I've contacted some other concerned people to see what we can do about it, but considering the corruption, it would be unwise to publish anything about it at this time. There was an orphanage not far away where teenage girls were rented out to men for sex, and the girls tried to tell their story to journalists. The next day, the orphanage burned down with 41 of them dying inside, while over a dozen police officers stood outside the locked doors with the keys. The truth is starting to come out, and you can read about it in the New York Times article, "A Locked Door, a Fire, and 41 Girls Killed as Police Stood By," published on Valentine's Day 2019. Also, a shocking expose by my friend Alex, a young man abused in one such orphanage, is coming out now called "Looking at My Past, I Found My Future." It tells the harrowing story of Alexander Chisholm Guibo, who found a loving family with a truly great lady, his adopted mother, Lucita. And this is just a small corner of the world I inhabit. I've written more in depth about the plight of young women in the Icarus series, with veiled suggestions about what can be done. Heroes, there are damsels in distress in need of you. I wrote a book where the villain, one of the Trojan horse operatives of the U.S. government, sends to poor countries under the guise of aid, who then contact gangs and recruit them to overthrow their own governments. And he confides in the hero, "We fund and encourage terrorism in places like Syria. We destabilize volatile countries while lying about it to the public so that the people will be forced to flee their homeland. That'll create a massive refugee crisis that will bully Western Europe into accepting. Why? To destabilize Europe. Now, while not all Muslims are assholes, enough of them have a very different set of values, and they'll inevitably clash with modern Europeans. They'll see women in skimpy clothes and they'll either chastise them or rape them. They will see gay men and beat them to death in the streets. They will take over whole towns with their morality. Of course, the people won't stand for this. They've come a long way in recent years only to see the ground they've won trampled on by outsiders. We'll make it illegal for them to say anything about it, and that will make the people turn on their own governments. There will be rebellions, the streets will run with blood, and the world will see how quickly that paper-thin veneer of civilization drops, exposing what lies underneath. On this side of the pond, we do it in El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua, making conditions so horrible that people have no choice but to emigrate to the U.S., causing all kinds of trouble at the border, pitting the entire country against itself. I see the entire first world on the brink of self-annihilation, all the people who are quick to violence, not just ready but willing to kill each other off, leaving us, the intelligent ones, to inherit the earth. I do not believe that is the goal, but it is definitely similar. The idea is to cause civil wars in North America and Europe so that the military will be forced to intervene and establish order, specifically the new feudal system I mentioned earlier. I've been saying for years that the Republican Party now is different from the one I grew up listening to. Republicans themselves are the same, wanting less governmental control of their lives, saying to work hard and to earn your money and mind your own business. But the politicians seem to have become caricatures of themselves, getting more and more extreme and seeming to promote a massive swing of the population toward the left. Why would they want to do this, I wondered. Then it hit me. The idea was to make a majority of the voting public identify with a group that favored more governmental control. Hi. People passing by that I hope don't understand English. The idea was to make the majority of the voting public identify with a group that favored more governmental control. The side that would consider themselves the rebels in Star Wars, fighting the tyranny of the Empire, are now the ones pushing for the strengthening of that empire. I find comfort in meeting other people who are more educated than myself who've been making the same predictions independently. Because how did I come up with it? Me, the crackpot who bumped his head. It just came to me in a flash one day, like knowing my father was cheating on my mother and the Irish and U.S. economies were about to tank. I'm sure this does nothing for my credibility, but I just knew. And what tipped me off, crackpot that I am? 100 trillion mother lode of lithium and gold discovered in Afghanistan, reported on mining.com. Lorimer Wilson wrote an article in Financial Article Summaries Today, June 16, 2010. A recently unearthed 2007 United States Geological Service survey appears to have discovered nearly $1 trillion in mineral deposits in Afghanistan, far beyond any previously known reserves and enough to fundamentally alter the Afghan economy and perhaps the Afghan war itself. The previously unknown deposits, including huge veins of iron, copper, cobalt, gold, and critical industrial metals like lithium, are so big and include so many minerals that are essential to modern industry that Afghanistan could eventually be transformed into one of the most important mining centers in the world. An internal Pentagon memo, for example, states that Afghanistan could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, a key raw material in the manufacture of batteries for laptops and Blackberries. Batteries to make all of us smartphone-addicted Eloy. From reading that line, it all fell into place and made sense. If you were to Google algorithmic discrimination from an environmental psychology perspective, stress-inducing differential treatment, you would find that studies have been done before 2016 to find ways to increase stress in smartphone users. And why? Because people have been proven to buy more online when they're upset over racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. And they buy more of something in particular when they're bombarded by stress. Antidepressants. The pills made with opiates plundered from Afghanistan that make us kill ourselves and others, thereby calling attention to the overavailability of guns and justifying their confiscation. I would like to quote Gregory Prinz, who I think says it better than I can. Here's a conspiracy theory I've been contemplating since Trump was elected. The ruling criminal oligarchy, which has been a de facto organized crime syndicate based on banking, intelligence, and secret societies since the late 1700s in Europe and since the early 1900s in the U.S., has always wanted a much more controlled society, a tyranny with themselves in control. The question for the elites is how to make the tyranny permanent, how to avoid rebellion, and how to create what Charles Galton Darwin referred to as a more perfect form of slavery, a society in which the slaves love their servitude, in the words of Aldous Huxley, because they're comfortable, perfectly conditioned, and not even aware of their existence as a form of slavery in the first place. The traditional approach to tyranny is by force, with the ultimate technology-assisted manifestation represented in George Orwell's 1984. Let's refer to this as the right-wing approach to tyranny. The newer approach to tyranny is found in Huxley's Brave New World, where people are kept docile and compliant through the use of drugs, all sorts of distraction, and unlimited sexual freedom. In his foreword to the 1946 edition of Brave New World, Huxley actually referred to sexual freedom as a form of political control. Let's call this the left-wing approach to tyranny. Although the ruling elites always want overwhelming force to be available to them as a last resort if necessary, by the early decades of the 20th century, they had decided that the left-wing approach to tyranny would be more acceptable to the masses, less likely to produce revolt, and more sustainable, with the goal being a permanent tyranny based on a more perfect form of slavery. This decision led to the so-called counterculture movement, which was conceived in ruling elite think tanks and fully supported by the CIA and other establishment organizations. Much of what we associate with modern liberalism, rejection of traditional values, rejection of religion, feminism, abortion, the pill, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, were heavily supported and pushed by conservative establishment institutions such as the major foundations, think tanks,